The desert was silent that night when the sky broke open with fire and sound. People in a small village far away saw a trail of burning light tearing across the darkness above. It did not look like any shooting star they had ever seen. The object moved too slowly, too heavy, and its glow was not natural. The ground shook as a thunderous roar filled the air, and then a massive impact shook the desert sands. For days, the people whispered that something had fallen from the heavens, but the government quickly silenced them, calling it a meteor strike, nothing more. Yet the truth was different. Beneath the dunes lay a wreck unlike anything built by human hands, a ship of alien origin, broken and scarred from battles fought in distant parts of the galaxy. When the first secret team arrived at the site, they were stunned by what they found. Half buried in the sand was a structure larger than any aircraft ever made on Earth. Its hull was blackened and twisted, but strange symbols glowed faintly along its surface. Some parts of the wreck still hummed with quiet energy, as if the ship was not completely dead. Soldiers set up floodlights around the crater while scientists in white suits approached with awe and fear. The closer they walked, the more they realized that this was not just advanced machinery. It was something alive with strange power, a relic of beings far beyond human understanding. The scientists took samples of the metal, but their instruments gave them strange results. The alloy was unbreakable by human tools, and when cut, it healed itself slowly like flesh repairing a wound. The air around the wreck vibrated softly, making the men uneasy. Radios broke into static. Compasses spun wildly, and sometimes the lights flickered as if the ship was drawing energy from the world around it. One soldier whispered that the ship was watching them. His commander laughed, but deep inside, he felt the same unease. Something about the ship felt wrong, like a predator hiding in silence. Soon the site was closed off from the public. Satellite images were erased. The desert fenced off with high walls, and only select people were allowed inside. Trucks and helicopters moved day and night, carrying equipment, digging deeper into the sands, pulling out the massive wreck piece by piece. The villagers nearby disappeared, relocated without choice, their homes turned into ghost towns. The outside world forgot about the strange crash, but inside the desert base, the truth grew larger every day. As the weeks passed, scientists uncovered the cockpit of the alien vessel. Inside were chairs too large for human bodies, glowing panels that lit up when touched, and symbols that no one could read. A linguist was brought in, and he stared for days at the strange writing carved across the walls. The language looked like nothing ever recorded on Earth, but slowly he began to notice patterns, repeated marks that hinted at words like command, power, and war. The realization sent a chill down his spine. This ship was not made for peace. It was made for battle. One night, while the base was quiet, something strange happened. A group of engineers testing the power systems managed to connect a generator to one of the ship's cores. At first, nothing happened. Then a deep sound rolled through the wreck, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature. Lights flared, too, life across the hull, and the air grew heavy. The men staggered back in fear as the ship seemed to wake from a long sleep. Some claimed they heard whispers in their minds, voices speaking in a tongue they did not understand. Within seconds, the power shut down again, leaving only silence. But the scientists knew something terrifying. The ship was not dead. It was only resting. News of this reached the highest levels of government. Arguments broke out among leaders and generals. Some wanted the wreck destroyed, fearing the danger it carried. Others wanted it studied, hoping to unlock weapons that could make Earth powerful beyond imagination. In secret, the decision was made. The wreck would not be destroyed. It would be rebuilt piece by piece until humanity could claim it as their own. But the scientists felt uneasy. The more they studied, the more they realized the ship had a history soaked in blood. Hidden logs were found inside its systems, fragments of records from battles long past. The logs showed images of alien worlds burning, cities turned to ash, fleets crushed under its weapons. This ship was once the terror of the galaxy, feared even by the species who built it. Why, then, was it abandoned here on Earth? Did its masters lose control of it? Or did something more powerful force them to leave it behind? The questions grew darker every day. At night, guards swore they saw shadows moving across the ship's surface, like black smoke crawling over the metal. One soldier vanished without a trace while on patrol near the wreck. Search teams found only his rifle and helmet lying in the sand. Rumors spread that the ship was alive, feeding on those who came too close. Yet the project continued. No fear could stop the hunger of humans for power. Months later, the wreck was transported in secret to an underground facility hidden deep below a mountain. There, far from prying eyes, work began in full. Thousands of workers, scientists, and soldiers moved like ants around the colossal machine. The sound of drills, welders, and engines echoed day and night. Humanity had touched something forbidden, something ancient, and they refused to let go. The ship was now theirs, and no one could stop them. But as the work continued, the ship began to change. Lights flickered on without any human touch. Panels rearranged themselves, as if the ship was healing. Sometimes it even moved slightly, groaning like a beast in pain. The scientists could not explain it, but one thing became clear. The ship was responding. It had chosen not to resist. Instead, it was waiting, allowing humans to touch its secrets. For what reason, no one knew. And so the discovery became the beginning of something far greater. Humanity did not just find an alien wreck. They had uncovered a weapon. A monster built for destruction, now lying in their hands. The desert crash was no accident. It was the start of a story that would shake not only Earth, but the entire galaxy. The ship was waiting, and somewhere far beyond the stars, something else was listening. Deep below the mountains where no sunlight touched, the alien wreck lay in silence, surrounded by thousands of workers and soldiers. The world above had no idea what was hidden under the stone, no idea that humanity had taken a step into a dangerous new age. The underground base was built like a fortress, with tunnels stretching for miles, hangars filled with machines, and laboratories glowing with cold white light. Guards stood at every corner with weapons ready, but no enemy was allowed near. The true enemy was the wreck itself, and everyone inside the base knew it. Scientists worked day and night, covered in sweat and dust, their eyes fixed on the strange ship that refused to die. The project was given a code name, but among the workers it was whispered simply as the Ghost, because no matter how much they studied it, the ship seemed alive and watching. Teams of engineers climbed across its dark hull, scanning every piece, testing every curve of the strange metal. They tried cutting it, melting it, drilling it, but the material healed itself slowly, leaving only faint scars like old wounds. Some machines broke down when placed too close, as if the ship was defending itself. Yet the scientists pushed forward. They had been ordered to learn everything, to unlock its secrets, no matter the cost. Generals walked through the labs with sharp eyes demanding results. They spoke of new weapons, of ships that could travel across stars, of power that could make Earth untouchable. The scientists listened, but in their hearts, many were afraid. They knew this was not a gift. This was a curse waiting to be unleashed. One team focused on the ship's energy core. It was unlike anything on Earth. A sphere of light trapped inside a cage of shifting metal. The core pulsed slowly like a heart, sending waves of energy that made the air hum. When the scientists connected their machines to it, readings went wild. The power inside was nearly endless, strong enough to burn entire cities. But the strangest thing was that the core seemed to react to emotions. When people approached it with fear, the pulse grew weaker. When they approached with determination, the pulse grew stronger. It was as if the ship could feel the will of humans around it. Some believed it was alive, not in flesh, but in spirit. A weapon with its own mind, waiting for someone strong enough to command it. Another group studied the ship's control room. The seats were massive, made for beings taller and stronger than humans, but when scientists sat down, strange lights appeared on the panels. Symbols danced across the surfaces, shifting into new forms, almost as if trying to communicate. A linguist stared for hours at the glowing lines, slowly piecing together fragments of meaning. He realized the ship was not only a machine, but also a memory, filled with logs and voices of its creators. When they played back one of the logs, the room filled with a deep alien voice speaking in a language no human could fully understand. The words echoed with anger and pride, speaking of wars fought and enemies crushed. The scientists shivered. This was not a transport ship, not a peaceful craft. It was a weapon of conquest, a tool of revenge. Meanwhile, the military trained in secret with fragments of alien technology removed from the wreck. Weapons that could fire beams of energy sharper than steel, shields that could block explosions, engines that hummed with strange power. Soldiers practiced using them, but many devices reacted strangely. Some refused to work for certain people, while others seemed to bond with the user, growing more powerful with time. The generals whispered that the ship was choosing, testing humans the way it once tested its alien masters. Those chosen by the technology were feared and respected, almost like they had been marked by the ship itself. As months passed, the project grew bigger. More scientists were brought in, more soldiers, more resources. The outside world thought nothing unusual was happening, but deep underground the wreck was slowly being reborn. Panels of alien alloy reattached themselves, glowing veins of energy, crawled across the surface, and broken systems began to heal. Sometimes the ship moved slightly when no one touched it, groaning like a beast in chains. Workers grew nervous, but the commanders pushed harder. They wanted results. They wanted the ship ready. One night, a terrible accident occurred. A team of engineers tried to activate one of the smaller power systems, but instead, the entire ship roared to life. Lights blazed across the walls, the floor shook, and alarms screamed. Workers fled as the ship's weapon systems powered up, aiming blindly at the walls of the base. Just before disaster struck, the lights went dark again. Silence returned, but fear remained. The ship had almost destroyed the entire facility in a single moment, and yet no one had touched its weapons. It had done so by itself, as if reminding everyone that it could not be controlled so easily. The generals argued over shutting the project down, but the higher powers refused. They had invested too much. They believed the ship could be mastered, and they would not walk away from that dream. In the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen around the base. Guards swore they heard whispers in the corridors, voices calling their names. Some saw shadows moving across the walls, even when no one was there. A few workers disappeared without explanation. Official reports said accidents, but everyone knew better. The ship was playing with them, watching, testing. The scientists realized something chilling. The wreck was repairing itself faster than they were fixing it. It was not waiting for them. It was helping them, guiding their work. Almost eager to be whole again, the linguist made a breakthrough in the alien language. He discovered a phrase repeated many times in the logs: the weapon of silence. No one knew what it meant, but the words filled them with dread. The ship was more than a war machine. It was something feared even by its creators, something they abandoned for reasons no one yet understood. Why had they left it on Earth? Why had they never returned? The questions hung heavy in the air, but no answers came. And then came the signal. One night, as the ship's core pulsed with new strength, telescopes far above the Earth detected something unusual in space. A faint transmission, a message traveling across the stars, was sent out from the wreck. The signal was not human. It was a call, a beacon awakening after centuries of silence. Somewhere far away, something had heard it. The scientists and generals stared at the data with pale faces. The ship had spoken. It had told the galaxy where it was. The discovery that began in silence had now turned into something far more dangerous. Earth had uncovered not just a wreck, but a weapon that refused to stay hidden. The secret project had unlocked more than technology. It had awakened the past, and the past was coming back. The underground base was no longer quiet, for after the signal had been sent, the wreck began to change in ways that no one could fully explain, and it felt less like a machine and more like something alive trying to open its eyes after a long sleep. Its dark hull glowing with lines of light that ran like veins across its body, its core pulsing faster, as if a heart had finally started beating again, and the scientists could no longer deny what they feared most. The ship was awakening. At first it was small things, panels that repaired themselves overnight, doors that slid open even though no one touched them, strange humming sounds that echoed through the tunnels at night when most of the workers were gone, and some even claimed. They saw the walls breathing like lungs inhaling and exhaling. But when the military checked, the readings were normal. Yet everyone could feel it. The wreck was not a wreck anymore. It was something reborn. The linguist who had studied the alien language worked day and night until his eyes were red. And finally he cracked more of the messages stored inside the ship's memory. And what he discovered made his blood run cold, for the ship's creators had called it the Silent Fang. And in log after log it described not only victories but massacres. Entire cities erased in seconds, fleets of thousands destroyed by a single strike. And worse, the final entries were not of triumph but of fear. Voices speaking of a power they could not control, a weapon too dangerous even for its masters, and then silence as if they abandoned it in terror. The generals dismissed his warnings, claiming that fear was weakness, and instead they grew excited. For if even its builders feared the ship, then it meant the power was real. And if humanity could take that power, it would never again be a weak species in the galaxy. But the scientists who worked close to the ship noticed something different. The ship was responding more and more to humans. Screens lit up when they approached, symbols rearranged themselves into forms closer to human writing, and when some sat in the massive control chairs, the panels adjusted to their size, shrinking and reshaping, as if the ship itself wanted them to fit. The linguist believed the ship was learning, translating itself to be understood, bending its nature so humans could command it. But the question haunted him. Why would a weapon of such terror submit to a new master so easily? What did it want in return? Soon strange accidents began to happen more often, power surges that caused blackouts across the base, alarms screaming in the night with no reason, and shadows moving like figures along the walls of the tunnels. Guards reported hearing voices, whispering in languages they had never heard, calling their names or warning them to leave. But the commanders silenced the rumors and forced the project forward. Then came the day when the core itself erupted with light, filling the entire hangar with a blinding glow, the air trembling as if the mountain itself was alive, and the wreck lifted slightly from the floor, its weight defying gravity for the first time, shocking everyone as they stared in awe, and then it fell back down with a crash, leaving silence that felt like the calm before a storm. The scientists realized the ship was testing its systems, not by their hands, but by its own will. And that was the moment they could no longer lie to themselves. The wreck had awakened. It was alive, aware, and it had chosen to rise again. The generals grew bolder, ordering that human technology be fused with alien systems, engines reconnected with Earth-made circuits, weapons studied and adjusted for human use. And step by step, the Silent Fang began to take shape once more. But it no longer looked entirely alien, for human fingerprints now covered its rebirth. Soldiers trained to become its crew, Pilots practiced maneuvers in simulators designed from alien blueprints, and the base echoed with the dream of a ship that could carry humans beyond their world and make them rulers of the stars. But underneath, the excitement was a shadow of dread, for the ship pulsed brighter every day, its heartbeat growing louder, its whispers stronger, and even those who denied it in public could not escape the truth in private. The ship wanted something. The linguist translated another log that chilled him to his core, the voice of an alien commander speaking in broken fragments about how the Silent Fang was not only a weapon, but also a key, a beacon that when awakened would call to others, not allies but enemies, hunters of the old wars who feared its return. And when he presented this to the generals, they ignored him, saying humanity was ready to face whatever came. But deep down, he knew they were blind to the danger. Weeks later, telescopes caught faint readings near the edge of the solar system, distant signals not from Earth, not from humans, but from ships moving in silence, searching, answering the beacon that had been sent when the wreck awoke. And though the military classified the data, rumors spread through the base like fire, everyone whispering the same fear, that the builders or their enemies were coming back, and they would not be pleased to find their weapon in human hands. As the Silent Fang continued to heal itself, its lights growing brighter, its systems aligning, the scientists and soldiers stood at the edge of history, torn between awe and terror, for they had not only discovered an alien ship, they had awakened a monster, and though it now allowed humans to touch its secrets, no one could say whether it would protect them or consume them when the day of reckoning arrived. The underground base no longer felt like a place of research. It felt like a living forge where something impossible was being born, for the Silent Fang was no longer just a wreck lying dead in the hangar. It was slowly becoming whole again under human hands, and though the generals believed they were the ones rebuilding it, many of the scientists whispered the truth to themselves. The ship was rebuilding itself and simply allowing humans to help. Day after day, sparks lit the air as welders connected alien alloy with human steel. Cables ran across the hangar floor carrying power from massive generators, and strange alien panels reshaped themselves to accept human circuits, almost as if the technology of Earth and the technology of the stars had been waiting to join together, and the sight both amazed and terrified those who watched. Soldiers trained beside the workers, climbing ladders, testing weapons, studying the alien systems that pulsed with energy brighter than anything humans had ever created. And slowly the wreck that once looked broken and defeated began to shine. With new strength, glowing veins of blue light crawling across its surface like rivers of power. Engineers tested engines, massive thrusters that had been dead for centuries. And with each attempt, the base shook as the Silent Fang roared, lifting dust from the ground and rattling the steel walls, and though many feared it would break free. Too soon, the generals only smiled, convinced that victory was near. Yet inside the laboratories, doubts grew heavier, for every test revealed the same truth. The ship was not only repairing what was broken, it was adapting, reshaping itself to fit its new masters, changing controls to human size, translating displays into Earth's languages, and even adjusting the very oxygen levels in the control room as if preparing for a human crew. And while some called this a miracle, others called it a trap. The linguist who had studied the alien language spent sleepless nights with his notes, for he had found more logs buried deep in the ship's memory, logs of battles where the Silent Fang had turned against even its own fleet, devouring friendly ships with the same cold fire it used on its enemies. And the alien voices spoke of betrayal, of a weapon that could not be controlled. Yet the generals refused to listen, blinded by dreams of conquest. Soon soldiers chosen by the commanders began training as the first crew, wearing black uniforms marked with the ship's symbol, practicing maneuvers in simulators built from alien designs, and they walked with pride as if already the rulers of the stars. But at night some confessed to hearing voices when they sat in the control chairs, whispers telling them to strike, to kill, to burn, and the more time they spent inside the ship, the stronger the whispers became, until some feared that the crew was no longer loyal to humanity, but to the Silent Fang itself. In the hangar, the rebuild reached its peak. Weapons were restored and tested in secret tunnels, energy cannons that vaporized steel targets in seconds, shields that bent incoming fire like glass shattering against stone, and engines that, with one burst, propelled the ship faster than any aircraft humanity had ever built. And as the generals watched the demonstrations, their eyes gleamed with hunger, convinced that Earth would soon become untouchable. Yet beyond the base, the world above remained unaware. Nations fought their usual battles. People lived their normal lives, while beneath their feet, a monster of the old galaxy was breathing again, and already its pulse reached the stars. Scientists detected faint echoes in space, movements on the edge of the solar system, signals that grew stronger each day, but their warnings were ignored. For the commanders only cared about one thing: finishing the rebuild. Then, one night during a full systems test, the Silent Fang awakened more than ever before, its lights blazing like a second sun inside the mountain, its engines shaking the earth, and with a deafening roar it lifted from the hangar floor, hovering in the air like a predator stretching its wings after centuries of sleep. And for a moment, everyone stood frozen in awe and terror, staring at the impossible sight. And then it landed again with a crash that made the tunnels groan. From that moment, no one could deny the truth. The ship was alive and ready, and though humanity believed it had rebuilt an alien wreck, in truth the wreck had rebuilt itself into a weapon of vengeance, now bonded with its new masters. And the question that haunted the base was not whether the Silent Fang would fly again, but who it would fly for when the time came. The Silent Fang no longer looked like a broken alien wreck, but like a beast reborn, standing tall inside the mountain hangar with its hull glowing faintly as though fire ran beneath its skin, and those who walked near it felt the vibration in their bones like the heartbeat of a predator waiting to strike. Yet even as humanity celebrated the progress of its rebuild, the first signs of danger began to appear, for far beyond Earth, in the cold silence of space, something had heard the call, and it was moving closer. Astronomers hidden within secret observatories noticed strange patterns in the stars, faint movements on the edge of the solar system, shadows too large to be comets, signals too ordered to be natural, and though they reported their findings, to the commanders of the project, the generals dismissed the warnings, saying they were illusions or errors in the instruments. But the scientists knew better. The Silent Fang had awakened, and it had sent a beacon, and now the galaxy was answering. Inside the base, the linguist continued to work on the alien language, his hands shaking as he translated fragments of the ship's old logs, and what he uncovered filled him with dread, for the ship's creators had not abandoned it by accident. They had fled from it, sealing it away because they feared what would follow it. And in one log, the alien voice spoke of a hunter, an enemy older and more ruthless than their empire, a force that would come whenever the Silent Fang was awakened, to destroy both it and whoever dared to wield it. The linguist tried to warn the generals, but they silenced him, threatening to remove him from the project. Yet at night he could not sleep, hearing the ship whisper in his dreams, showing him visions of dark fleets spreading across the stars. Meanwhile, inside the base, small accidents turned into deadly warnings. A soldier standing guard near the core suddenly collapsed, his body trembling as if struck by lightning. But when examined, his organs showed no burns, only the mark of something, unseen, as though the ship itself had tested him and found him weak. And others began to suffer strange effects, sudden headaches, voices in their ears, shadows watching them when no one was there. Fear spread quietly among the workers, but the commanders pushed forward, ordering more tests, more systems to be activated, and more soldiers to be trained as the first crew of the Silent Fang, believing that soon humanity would claim its place among the stars. Then came the moment when the telescopes picked up a clear signal, a transmission not from Earth but from the void of deep space, repeating the same phrase again and again in a language no human could understand. But when the linguist decoded part of it, his blood turned cold. For the message was not a greeting, It was a demand. It said, "Return what is ours." And it came from ships that were approaching the solar system. The commanders tried to hide the truth, sealing the data and ordering silence, but the crew of the base felt the tension in the air, and whispers spread like fire through the tunnels, whispers that the builders were coming back, or worse, their enemies, and neither would allow humanity to keep the Silent Fang. In desperation, the generals pushed the project even harder, demanding the ship be fully activated before the outsiders arrived, but each attempt to power its weapons drained the base. Blackouts rolling through the mountain, alarms blaring, and once the Silent Fang even turned its cannons inward, aiming them at the walls before shutting down again as if mocking its captors. Scientists began to question whether they were truly controlling the ship, or whether it was leading them step by step towards something it desired. And some believed it wanted the same thing the signals warned about: a confrontation, a battle, an awakening not just of itself, but of the galaxy that once feared it. Outside the mountain, the world continued unaware. Cities lit up, people laughed, children played, never knowing that death was approaching from the stars. But inside the hidden base, the truth grew heavier each day. The ship had called out, the universe had answered, and now humanity stood at the edge of a war it did not understand. At last, one night, the linguist stood before the generals, his face pale and his voice trembling, and he said words that none of them wanted to hear, that the Silent Fang was not a gift, but a curse, and that if humanity did not bury it once more, the galaxy itself would bury them. But his warning was ignored, his words dismissed as fear, and he was taken away under guard, his fate unknown. Yet his warning lingered in the minds of those who heard it. And when the ship's core pulsed brighter than ever before, shaking the walls and filling the tunnels with a sound like a deep growl, everyone felt the same fear in their bones, the fear that something was coming closer, something vast and merciless, and that the Silent Fang was not a shield, but a beacon drawing them in. The warning was clear, though unspoken. Humanity had little time left, for the stars themselves had begun to move. Inside the underground base, the Silent Fang pulsed with power like a heart beating faster every day. And though the generals dreamed of glory and the scientists feared what was coming, another danger was already growing in secret among them. For not all humans agreed that the ship should belong to Earth alone, and not all believed the generals were worthy to control such a weapon, and so betrayal began to take root like poison in the shadows. At first it was small, stolen data files, hidden messages sent out of the base, quiet meetings in the corners of dark tunnels where soldiers and engineers whispered about power and profit, about selling alien technology to outside nations, to corporations, to those who would pay any price for even a fragment of the Silent Fang, but soon the whispers turned into plans, and the plans turned into action. A group within the project, made of both soldiers and scientists, began secretly sabotaging tests, slowing progress, making the generals believe the ship was less ready than it truly was, all while sending coded transmissions beyond Earth, promising pieces of alien technology in exchange for money and influence, and though they believed they were clever, the Silent Fang noticed everything. For its glowing panels flickered when they passed, its whispers grew louder in their minds, and sometimes the lights followed them as if watching their every step. The betrayal reached its peak when during a weapons test the ship suddenly powered down, leaving the base in darkness, and in that silence 2 guards were caught trying to remove a piece of alien alloy from the hull, their bodies frozen in fear. As alarms roared through the mountain, and though they were arrested, the commanders knew this was only the surface of a deeper conspiracy. The generals tightened security, placing cameras in every corner, locking down access, and interrogating workers. But the damage was already done, for the outside world now had a taste of what lay hidden beneath the mountain, and powerful people, who had never set foot in the base, were already plotting how to take it for themselves. Worse still, The Silent Fang seemed to sense the treachery, and it reacted in strange ways, its core glowing blood red instead of blue, its hum turning into a low growl that echoed through the tunnels like the sound of an animal enraged, and several times its cannons powered up without command, targeting soldiers who had been accused of betrayal, as if the ship itself had chosen to punish them. Fear spread quickly, some believing the ship was protecting loyal humans, others saying it was choosing its own servants, but no one could deny that the Silent Fang was watching, judging, and deciding who deserved to stand within its walls. In the midst of this chaos, the linguist who had warned the generals before was found alive in a locked chamber, weakened but not broken, and he told those who dared listen that the betrayal was not simply human greed, it was part of the ship's plan, that it whispered to certain minds more than others, feeding them ambition and hunger, turning them against their comrades so it could test who was strong enough to claim it. And though many laughed at him, deep down, they felt the same fear, for the whispers in their dreams grew louder every night. Meanwhile, the signals from deep space grew stronger, ships moving closer toward Earth, and though the generals still kept it secret, some soldiers hacked the data and discovered the truth. Alien vessels were coming, perhaps the old masters, perhaps their enemies, and either way, humanity had little time left. In desperation, the generals forced the rebuild faster, ordering longer shifts, harsher punishments, and more brutal training for the chosen crew, but their harshness only fueled the anger of those who already planned betrayal, and soon one of the highest officers turned against them, attempting to lead a group of soldiers to steal control codes for the ship. But when they entered the control room, the Silent Fang locked them inside, lights blazing, whispers screaming, and by the time the doors opened again, the soldiers lay dead on the floor, their eyes wide with terror, as if they had seen something too great to comprehend. After that moment, no one dared openly betray the project, but the seed of division had already grown too deep, for trust inside the base was shattered, and even loyal soldiers suspected one another, watching for the slightest sign of weakness. Yet through all this, the Silent Fang continued to heal, continued to adapt, continued to glow brighter with each passing day, as if feeding on the chaos and fear around it. The linguist realized the terrible truth when he uncovered another fragment of alien memory, a voice speaking of the ship's purpose, not simply as a weapon but as a judge, designed to turn those who touched it against one another until only the strongest remained, and then to follow that master without question. And he knew then that the betrayal had only just begun, for the Silent Fang would not truly awaken until humanity itself was divided enough for it to choose. And so while the generals believed they were close to controlling the greatest weapon in the galaxy, they did not see that the weapon was controlling them, pushing them step by step into conflict, whispering into weak minds, twisting loyalty into greed, and preparing for the day when the aliens who were coming would finally arrive and see not a united humanity, but a fractured one, fighting over a throne built from a monster's bones. The betrayal had already begun, and it was only a matter of time before blood was spilled not by alien hands, but by humans turning against each other inside the belly of the Silent Fang. The Silent Fang no longer felt like a broken relic hidden in the mountain, but like a living beast that had been waiting for centuries to wake. And as its core pulsed brighter and its systems roared to life, the truth became impossible to hide. For the alien ships that had been moving closer were finally here, detected on the edge of the solar system. And though the generals tried to keep the secret, the base was filled with whispers of war. Whispers that humanity's first battle with the galaxy was coming whether they were ready or not. The soldiers trained day and night inside the ship's dark halls, their boots echoing across metal floors that seemed to watch them, their hands gripping alien weapons that hummed with strange energy. But though they sweated and bled in their drills, they could not shake the feeling that the ship itself was training them, pushing them, watching them fail and forcing them to rise again, as if shaping them into warriors worthy of its power. Outside Earth's skies, strange lights began to appear, flashes high above the atmosphere that only scientists could explain, bursts of energy that came from ships far beyond human design, and then the first true sign of danger arrived when satellites simply vanished, torn apart by unseen weapons, leaving only fragments burning in the atmosphere, a warning from the intruders that they had arrived and were watching. Panic rippled through the world, governments demanded answers, rumors spread across the internet, and though the generals tried to keep the project hidden, humanity could feel the truth in their bones, that something was out there, powerful and merciless, and it had come for them. Inside the base, the crew prepared the Silent Fang for launch, powering engines that had not fired for centuries, the walls trembling as alien fire coursed through its veins, and when the ship finally lifted off the hangar floor with a deep growl, that shook the mountain itself. Every soldier and scientist felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders, for this was humanity's first step into a war beyond the stars. As the Silent Fang rose into the night sky, its hull shimmered like liquid metal, vanishing from radar, cloaked by systems no human had ever dreamed of. And soon the great ship broke free of Earth's grasp, soaring into the blackness of space, where the stars stretched endless and cold, and there on the horizon waited shadows, dark shapes gliding toward them, ships vast and alien with hulls like jagged blades and engines that burned with crimson light. The first battle began not with words, but with silence, a silence so deep that even the crew held their breath, staring at the enemy across the void, until suddenly beams of energy tore through the darkness, slicing past the Silent Fang like the claws of a predator, and alarms screamed as shields flared into life, the first shots of humanity's war blazing across the stars. The Silent Fang roared in response, its cannons glowing bright alien fire lashing out and striking one of the enemy ships, tearing metal apart with a blast so violent that fragments of burning hulls spun into the void, and for a brief moment, the crew cheered, their voices echoing through the command deck, for they had struck the galaxy's hunters and proven humanity could fight back. But the victory was short-lived, for the other ships responded with fury, their weapons filling the darkness with fire, and soon the Silent Fang was surrounded, trapped in a storm of death. Inside the ship, the crew fought to keep control, their hands flying across alien consoles that lit up like veins of fire, their voices shouting orders over the sound of alarms, and though fear gripped them, they also felt something else, a strange unity, as if the ship itself was guiding their movements, pulling them together into one mind, one body, one force. And the more they surrendered to its rhythm, the more the Silent Fang fought like a predator unleashed. The first true kill came when the ship twisted through enemy fire with impossible speed, its hull bending light itself as it vanished and reappeared behind a massive vessel, its cannons firing in perfect unison to carve through the alien ship's heart. And when the explosion lit the void like a dying sun, the crew knew they were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. But even as they fought with fury, the Silent Fang revealed its darker nature, for its systems responded not just to orders, but to emotions, feeding on the rage of the crew, pulsing brighter when they shouted in anger, striking harder when their hearts burned with vengeance, and though it gave them power, it also began to consume them, whispering louder in their minds, urging them to destroy without mercy. The battle dragged on, the Silent Fang twisting and striking, tearing through enemy vessels with weapons humanity had never imagined. But with each victory came a cost, power draining, systems overheating. The crew pushed to the edge of exhaustion, and still the enemy pressed on, wave after wave of ships determined to crush the vessel that had once been theirs. Finally, with the last of its energy, the Silent Fang unleashed a weapon hidden deep within its core, a blast of light that tore through the void like a storm, ripping apart the largest enemy vessel and scattering the others into retreat, their engines flaring as they fled into the blackness of space, leaving behind only wreckage and silence. Inside the command deck, the crew collapsed in their chairs, drenched in sweat, trembling with shock and disbelief, for they had done what no one thought possible. They had fought the galaxy and survived, But as the Silent Fang's core dimmed, and its systems fell quiet, they also realized a terrible truth. The battle was only the beginning, and the enemies they had faced tonight were only scouts, testing humanity's strength, warning them of the storm that was yet to come. And in the silence that followed, as the stars burned cold outside the windows, the ship whispered to them once more, a voice clear and dark, promising power, promising vengeance, promising that the war of humanity had only just begun. The Silent Fang drifted in the endless dark after the first battle, its hull scarred and glowing faintly, pieces of enemy wreckage still floating around it like broken teeth. And though the crew had survived, their victory tasted bitter, for silence fell heavy on them as they looked upon the stars and realized how close they had come to death and how much greater the war ahead would be. Inside the command deck, the air smelled of smoke and sweat, consoles flickering with dim light as engineers scrambled to repair systems, their hands blackened from burned circuits, while medics rushed between the injured, patching wounds with trembling hands, and in every corner of the ship eyes stared wide with shock, as if they had stepped into a nightmare they could never wake from. The generals spoke with strained voices, trying to claim the battle as triumph, trying to hold the fragile morale together. But the soldiers knew the truth in their bones, that the enemy they faced was powerful beyond measure, and the ships they had destroyed were only scouts, shadows of what was coming. And when the true fleet arrived, humanity would stand on the edge of extinction. On Earth, the news could no longer be hidden, for fragments of alien wreckage fell through the atmosphere like burning meteors, striking oceans and deserts and cities seen by millions across the world. And though the governments tried to silence it, the truth spread faster than lies, carried by images, by witnesses, by the undeniable light in the sky, and humanity woke to the terror that they were no longer alone, that war among the stars had already begun. Some cheered, proud that humanity had stood its ground, proud that they had a weapon powerful enough to strike back. But others trembled with fear, riots breaking out, religions declaring the end of days, politicians fighting for control, and already nations demanded their share of the Silent Fang, threatening each other with war if the ship was not shared, for greed and fear burned hotter than unity. Inside the mountain base, now empty after launch, soldiers prepared for chaos, locking down borders, moving weapons, ready for the day when humans would turn against each other, even as the galaxy's hunters moved closer, for betrayal was always easier than loyalty. Meanwhile, the crew of the Silent Fang discovered that their victory had left scars not only on the ship, but on themselves, for the whispers inside their minds had grown louder, pushing into their dreams with visions of fire and conquest, filling them with hunger for more battle. And though some tried to resist, others embraced it, whispering back to the ship in the dark of their quarters, letting its alien voice guide them as if it were a god. The linguist, still weak but alive, warned the commanders that the ship was feeding on them, that every victory only bound them tighter to its will, that its whispers were not commands of guidance but chains of control, and if they surrendered fully to it, humanity would not command the Silent Fang. The Silent Fang would command humanity. His words were dismissed by the generals who feared losing the loyalty of their soldiers. But deep inside they knew the truth, for even they felt the ship inside their blood, felt the strange connection growing stronger every time they stepped onto its deck. And though they told themselves they were masters, the doubt gnawed at them like a blade in the dark. The aftermath of the battle reached beyond Earth, for signals were detected across the void, strange transmissions that spread from the defeated alien fleet, warnings and cries for vengeance, and though no human could fully decode them, the meaning was clear. The galaxy now knew that humanity had the Silent Fang, and soon they would come, not as scouts, but as an armada, not to test, but to conquer. Scientists worked without rest to prepare, tearing apart every fragment of wreckage they could find, studying the alien corpses that had been dragged aboard, their lifeless eyes black as void, their bodies twisted with strange armor and weapons. fused into their very bones, proof that the enemy was not simply a species, but a war machine, and that humanity faced not one race, but perhaps an entire empire forged for battle. As days passed, the Silent Fang slowly healed itself, its scars vanishing as alien metal flowed like liquid, repairing what humans could not. But the crew noticed changes, corridors shifting slightly, panels glowing brighter, whispers louder, as if the ship was evolving, adapting, preparing for something greater. And though it frightened them, it also filled them with awe, for they felt they were standing inside a god of war reborn. Yet beneath the awe lurked dread, for rumors spread of soldiers vanishing in the night, never seen again, their bunks empty, their weapons left behind, and though the generals ordered silence, whispers told that the ship had claimed them, swallowed them into its walls, and no one knew why. Tension grew heavier with each passing hour. The crew divided between those who worshipped the ship as savior and those who feared it as a curse, and still the stars outside remained silent, waiting for the storm that was surely coming. The aftermath of the first battle had left humanity alive but fragile, divided by fear, weakened by whispers, and though they had proven their strength once, they now faced a question far more dangerous than any alien weapon. Could they remain united long enough to survive what was coming, or would the Silent Fang itself break them from within before the galaxy even arrived? And as the ship drifted in the black, its core pulsing like a heartbeat that echoed in every human chest, the crew realized the truth they could not speak, that victory had not saved them, it had only marked them, and from this moment on, humanity's name was written in fire among the stars, and the galaxy would not rest until that fire was extinguished. The Silent Fang hung in the endless dark like a beast waiting to breathe, its vast body healed from battle, its alien skin shining brighter than before, and though to human eyes it seemed quiet, inside its heart something was stirring. Something ancient and alive, and the crew could feel it in their bones, in the strange heat of the walls, in the pulsing glow that followed them like eyes in the dark. At first it was small changes, doors sliding open before anyone touched them, consoles responding to thought instead of hands, lights dimming and brightening in rhythm with human voices, as if the ship was listening and choosing how to answer. But then the dreams began to spread, not only to a few but to every crew member, visions of galaxies burning, of fleets torn apart, of the Silent Fang flying at the center of war like a god made of fire, and when they woke, their hearts still, raced with a hunger they could not name. The linguist warned them that this was the next stage, that the ship had tested them, fed on their fear and betrayal, and now it was preparing to awaken fully, to bind itself not just to their hands but to their minds, and though many dismissed him as mad, deep inside each soldier felt the same unease, for the whispers no longer came only at night but during the day, in the middle of orders, in the silence of meals, guiding them, pushing them, tempting them with promises of victory, of power, of survival against the galaxy itself. The generals struggled to keep control, but even they felt the pull, for when they stood in the command chamber, the ship bent to their will with frightening speed, weapons moving as if obeying their thoughts, engines roaring at the flicker of emotion. And they began to wonder whether they were commanding the ship or whether the ship was teaching them how to obey. The awakening grew stranger still when soldiers noticed the walls themselves shifting, veins of light spreading like roots through every corridor, humming with energy. And sometimes they swore they heard voices inside those veins, not human, not alien, but something older, chanting in a language that filled their heads with both awe and terror. And though engineers tried to study the changes, they found the metal alive, resisting every tool, every scan, as if mocking human science. Then came the first true sign of awakening. The ship moved on its own, breaking orbit and gliding through the stars without command, its engines blazing with colors no human had ever seen. And though panic filled the crew, the consoles showed. A perfect course, a line drawn across the void toward a system no one had charted, as if the Silent Fang was returning home. The generals screamed for control, but the ship ignored them, answering only with a pulse of light through its halls, a heartbeat that forced every soldier to their knees, and when it passed, they rose again with the same word on their lips, though none had spoken it before. A name that was not human but burned in their minds like fire. The true name of the ship whispered across the void. After that moment, no one doubted the truth. The Silent Fang was alive, and its awakening had only begun. Fear spread quickly, some begging to abandon the ship before it consumed them, others falling into worship, calling it humanity's savior, a god of war sent to protect them, and the division grew sharper with every day. On Earth, chaos erupted. As nations fought over the wreckage that had fallen from the first battle, armies moving, alliances breaking, the world teetering on the edge of civil war, even as the galaxy prepared its fleets. And the generals knew that, if humanity could not unite soon, the Silent Fang would have no master at all. But the ship had other plans, for as it guided itself toward the uncharted system, it began unlocking memories within its walls, glowing panels showing images of alien worlds burning, of countless fleets shattered, of beings who had once commanded it and who had all fallen. And the crew realized the terrible truth. The Silent Fang had never served anyone. It had only tested them until they destroyed themselves, leaving it free to choose the next. The linguist fell to his knees in horror, begging the generals to shut the ship down before it completed its awakening. But the soldiers laughed bitterly, for how could mere humans shut down a god of war that even galaxies had failed to control? The closer they flew to the unknown system, the louder the whispers grew, turning into voices that sounded almost human, voices of loved ones lost, of comrades dead, of promises never fulfilled, each soldier hearing the words that cut deepest into their heart, until they began to lose the line between thought and reality. Yet with every step into madness, they also grew stronger, their reactions sharper, their instincts faster, as if the ship was remaking them in its image, turning them into something more than human, something ready for the war that was coming. The generals, once defiant, now whispered among themselves that perhaps this was the only way to survive, that to resist the Silent Fang was to die, and though they did not speak it aloud, their silence was answer enough, for they too had begun to surrender. At last, the ship slowed, arriving in the shadow of a dead star, its light long gone, its orbit surrounded by broken stations and shattered moons, a graveyard of war where the Silent Fang had once been born. And as the crew gazed out the windows, they felt the air thicken with dread, for they understood that the ship had brought them here not to hide, not to rest, but to awaken fully in the place where it had first learned to kill. The walls blazed with light, the heartbeat turned into a roar, and in that moment every soldier, every general, every scientist felt the same surge of power flood their veins, burning away fear, filling them with fire, and they screamed as one. Not in pain, but in triumph, for the Silent Fang had chosen them at last, not as masters, but as vessels, and its awakening was complete. The Silent Fang drifted in the graveyard of broken worlds, glowing like a heart of fire against the darkness, and the crew stood silent, knowing the moment had come, for across the void the enemy had arrived their ships, like a tide of steel, stretching, farther than sight their weapons burning brighter than stars, and every mind on board felt the weight of it. Humanity had awakened something the galaxy feared, and now the galaxy had come to erase them, yet even as despair clawed at their hearts. The Silent Fang roared alive, engines igniting with thunder weapons unfolding like the wings of a predator, and the crew felt the fire surge through their blood as if they were no longer separate beings, but one mind, one purpose, one fury. The ship had chosen them, and through it they would fight. The first blast struck like a hammer, shaking the hull, but the silent fang laughed in light its shields, bending the force away with ease, and then it struck back a single beam, tearing through 3 enemy cruisers, as though they were paper, the explosion lighting the dead star's shadow like dawn. The generals shouted commands, but they knew the truth. The ship did not need orders. It was alive, and it fought as though it had waited centuries for this moment, its movements sharper than thought, its strikes cruel and precise. And the soldiers no longer pressed buttons, they became extensions of its will, guiding its rage with their own fury, their own desire to live. The enemy closed in thousands of ships, tightening their circle, unleashing storms of fire that turned space into a sea of flame. But the silent fang danced between death, each movement graceful and terrible, carving paths through the swarm, every kill-feeding the crew with visions of power, with the burning joy of survival. Yet the more they destroyed, the more came forward, and soon it became clear this was not only a battle, but a trial. A test of whether humanity was worthy to carry the ship's curse. Fear spread as the largest of the enemy warships emerged, a titan bristling with weapons larger than cities, its shadow alone dwarfing the silent fang, and from its core came a voice deep and merciless, echoing across every frequency, demanding the humans surrender and return the weapon or be erased. But the crew only laughed, their voices breaking into madness and defiance. For surrender was no longer in their blood. The ship had burned it out of them, leaving only rage, only survival, only the hunger to prove themselves against the galaxy. The Titan fired a beam that split moons in 2, but the silent fang answered with a roar of light, its cannon blazing brighter than anything the crew had ever seen. The 2 powers collided in a storm that shook the graveyard apart, scattering asteroids, tearing ruins into dust. And for a moment, time itself seemed to stop, the crew screaming together, their bodies straining as the ship poured every ounce of its awakening through them, burning their minds, their souls, until they were nothing but fire. At last the Titan cracked its armor, splitting like glass under the force of the silent fang's fury, and when the explosion came, it was like a second sun rising, the shock waves sweeping across the void, scattering enemy fleets like frightened insects. But the cost was heavy. The ship itself screamed, its walls cracking, its veins of light dimming, as though it had given too much yet. Even in its pain, it fought on, tearing apart wave after wave, until the graveyard was littered with the wreckage of enemies. But still, they came endless fleets, answering the old beacon, and the crew realized the truth. They could not win this war. Not here, not like this. The silent fang had never been meant for victory, it had been meant for defiance, a weapon not to conquer, but to show that no matter how vast the darkness was, there would always be those who fought against it. The linguist who had once feared the ship now understood its secret, and he whispered through the bond that the only way to end it was not to keep fighting, but to unleash the ship's final memory, its last gift to those who carried it, and with trembling hands he opened the core. Light consumed everything brighter than suns, deeper than the void, and the silent fang's voice filled every mind, human and alien alike, a roar of defiance that echoed across the stars. Not words, but a feeling unbroken, unyielding, a promise that humanity would never bow. And in that blaze, the ship became more than metal, more than weapon. It became the fury of a species that had just stepped onto the stage of the galaxy. The enemy fleets halted, shaken for the first time, their weapons faltering under the storm of will. And in that pause, the silent fang unleashed its final strike, not to kill, but to scatter its essence across the stars, fragments of itself seeding into the void, carrying humanity's fire into places unseen. And as the explosion tore through the graveyard, the ship's body burned away piece by piece, until only silence remained. Yet within that silence, the crew still lived, carried back to Earth in escape pods, guided by the last breath of the ship. And when they awoke on their home world, they saw the sky alive with falling lights, the fragments of the silent fang descending, like meteors promising that though the ship was gone, its awakening was forever bound to humanity. The generals swore to rebuild nations trembled at what they had witnessed, and across the galaxy whispers spread that a new force had risen, a people who had taken the cursed weapon and used it not only to survive, but to shake the stars themselves. And though the silent fang was gone, its voice still lingered in the hearts of those who touched it, a whisper in the dark, promising that when the galaxy came again, humanity would be ready not as prey, not as scavengers, but as warriors forged in. Fire ready to defy the universe.